Hi everyone, and welcome back to another Stream Raiders unit guide video. If this is the first video you're watching, feel free to check out the rest of my unit guide videos in this playlist. In this video, we're going to be talking about assassin units. These units are meant for very specific scenarios, so let's talk about when these guys are useful and how they work. We'll start with our common unit, the Rogue. Rogues are super fun units to play that can be savage in certain settings and completely useless in others. Rogues have damage reduction to ranged units and prioritize targeting ranged units. Their target priority is 75, so essentially an entire map. If there is no range units nearby, they then target flag bearers and healers, and then other support units. Because rogues have low HP, they die really quickly to melee units, or if they're running through a couple armored units. So the main thing is not to place them if they can't reach their target without going through melee or armored units. If you are trying to get a group of range units behind a mass group of armored units, those rogues will die, unless you can place the rogues strategically behind the range units where they don't have to go through the armor or melee units. Some of the specs have just unfortunately changed for rogues. The Swiftfoot spec, which was my favorite, was nerfed. Now rogues only move 15% faster in comparison to previously moving 25% faster. A 15% speed buff is still nice in a lot of settings though, so it's still a useful spec. The other useful rogue spec is going to be charming rogues. This spec was buffed to grant nearby allies a 30% range defense boost every 5 seconds over 3 AoE. This applies to rogues nearby other rogues, which really negates range damage when you have them in a group together. The assassin spec for rogues is practically useless because, one, rogues don't prioritize attacking melee units. We generally will never use rogues to go after melee units because melee enemies will kill rogues in 1 to 2 hits, especially if that melee unit is above level 20. It's usually a 1-hit kill for a rogue. That about wraps up our rogue information. The main point with rogues is use them against amassed ranged enemies. Do not drop them if there is a lot of melee and armored units. They're just not useful in those settings. Next, let's talk about the Buster. This is an explosive assassin unit that kamikazes into the enemy, dealing high AoE damage with increased damage dealt to armored units per milestone. This sounds great in theory, but this unit generally has to be placed really strategically for a couple of reasons. The first reason being it has very low HP and will die quickly before it meets its target, and the second being that this unit has a high power cost. If you place this unit in battles, you want to make sure it will hit its target. That means that no ranged or flying rogue enemy units can be near the Buster, otherwise they will snipe it before it makes contact with the enemy. Dropping Busters in battles will also scale up the next battle, meaning the game will get harder on the next level because the unit is considered strong. We can talk about power in another video. Leave a comment down below if you're interested in learning about how power and scaling works in Stream Raiders. Before we get into specializations for the Buster, it's time for the potion farming unit of the day. Out of the assassin units, the Buster is the best unit for farming potions. This is because of its AoE damage, causing it to get assists for kills. Now we'll get into the specs for this unit. The first and arguably best spec for Buster is Volatile. This gives the Buster a larger AoE of 3, which is really helpful as seen in dungeons with added boons that give plus AoE to Busters. The rushing spec just got buffed and now has a 50% increased speed, when before it was only a 15% increased speed. When a rushing Buster is epic, it goes up to 100% increased speed. It's hard to imagine what 50 or 100% increased speed looks like, but it is really fast, which may actually make this spec pretty viable, especially if you place haste on some rushing Busters. They're just gonna be like zooming. The last spec is the Focus Buster. This spec trades AoE range for a higher damage. This spec also got buffed to deal 50% more damage, which is quite a bit of extra damage for a Buster, especially a higher level Buster. The recent spec buffs given to rushing and focused have made those specs a little bit more viable for Buster. I still love the Volatile spec for its increased AoE, but am interested to have the other specs for dupes, especially the rushing specs. Gotta go fast. The next assassin unit is pretty cool, and like the rogue, the flying rogue can be super strong or not so strong. Flying rogues are the first flying unit in the game, making it a very unique unit because the only units that can attack these guys are range and other flying units. The exception is if an enemy unit is epic, it will be able to attack a flying unit. The targeting priority is 30 for flying rogues, so again, super widespread, and the priority is attacking other flying units, then support, then ranged units. A common misconception is that rogues and flying rogues work the same. These units couldn't contrast each other more, so despite having similar names, the rogue is strong against ranged units while the flying rogue is weak against ranged units, and both of these units work in very different ways in terms of strategy. So if you hear a captain saying, I want a rogue placed down, don't put your flying rogue. It is a entirely different unit. As you level this unit up to its milestones, it gains more range, and by level 20 it will have +5 range, and for some reason they give it 30% extra bonus damage to melee. It's really interesting, kind of like on the same plane as like a ranged unit. Yeah. I don't know why they did that, but whatever. Bonus damage. It's all good. Going into the specs on this unit, my favorite spec for Flying Rogue is the Focus spec. This deals 50% extra damage to support units, allowing the Flying Rogue to quickly kill those pesky healers. The Armored spec gives Flying Rogues a 30% ranged damage reduction, making them a little hardier. But in reality, you don't really want to drop Flying Rogues where there's tons of ranged enemies anyways. This spec was buffed, so it does make it a little bit nicer because you get a little bit more range damage reduction. I don't know if I would take it myself. I really like the Focus spec, but if you want to try it for yourself, it's not going to be a bad spec. It's just probably not the best spec. The last spec for this unit is the Swift spec. This spec was also buffed to give Flying Rogues a 50% increased movement speed, and when epic, a 100% increased movement speed. This seems really cool because that is a massive movement speed increase. But in terms of competitive modes like PvP, you want your Flying Rogues to stay behind your armor units and with your range units, and to be sniping healers and support units from the safety of the group. If your Flying Rogue rushes really far ahead and there are enemy ranged units, they'll likely be killed immediately, so kind of negates the purpose of a Flying Rogue if it's just rushing to its death. In general, Flying Rogues are pretty solid units. You just want to avoid dropping them if you see a lot of ranged units that will quickly kill them, and on the opposite end, they will be really good to drop if you need to snipe an enemy balloon buster from reaching your group. Speaking of balloon busters, this legendary assassin unit will complete our guide. Balloon busters are another flying unit and work similarly to a buster, dealing massive explosive damage on death, needing to be placed very strategically in order to be effective, otherwise they die quickly to ranged and flying units, and having a very high power cost. Note that this unit has a target priority range of 200, huge, and prioritizes bosses first. Super important. They prioritize bosses, big units, epic units, captain units, and giant units. Essentially, if you are trying to get your balloon buster to hit a group of basic units, like just a whole bunch of like armored units or something, it will not hit those units if there is a boss unit away from that group of units. That balloon buster will ignore all units and simply target the boss or the epic unit wherever it is on the map and try to get to that unit. This is extremely important to know because oftentimes people drop balloon busters thinking that they're gonna hit the closest group of enemies, and when I ask them, you know, hey, why did you drop that balloon buster, and they say, oh, I'm trying to hit that cluster of enemies right in front of us, it will not go after that cluster of enemies. It may fly right over it, getting sniped in the process, and it just makes the balloon buster practically useless. If this unit is placed on the battlefield with an enemy boss or epic units, it has to have a clear shot to those units. If it ends up flying anywhere near enemy range or flying rogue units, it'll be sniped and killed before it reaches its target. The other note on these units is that if it gets killed before making contact with the target, they only deal splash damage and not base damage. So it will deal a little bit of damage, but not as much as it should. Specs for balloon busters go as followed. Ironclad gives balloon busters 80% range damage reduction. Slaying balloon buster gives 200% more damage to giant and epic enemies. That's pretty solid because balloon busters deal a lot of damage. So if you can get them to hit that giant or epic enemy unit, it's pretty good amount of damage. And the last spec is the Volatile Balloon Buster. Gives an extra 20 splash damage, increasing the splash damage from 100 to 120. Also pretty useful. I'd say both Volatile and Slaying specs are not bad. I leave the choice up to you when you finally get your BB to level 20 in what to choose. You don't have to, keep in mind, I have my recommendations for specs. It's up to you what you choose. So you don't have to go with what I say, unless it's Rally Warrior. Do not place a Rally. Do not spec Rally Warrior. I don't want to see your Rally Warrior. We don't want, yeah. No martyr, you know, none of those things. But here it's okay. You can choose what you want. This concludes our Stream Raiders unit guide videos. I truly hope these videos have helped you. And if they have, leave a comment down below with any questions, or if you'd like to see more guide videos on different aspects of the game, let me know what you want to know about. If these videos helped or didn't help you, feel free to leave a like or dislike, sub to the channel, and even check me out on Twitch, where I mostly play horror games and Stream Raiders on the side. Super thank you to all the support you guys have given me. I really am grateful for it. And we'll see you guys soon, TM, with possibly more guide videos.